Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining our monthly webinar series. Today, our topic will be to share with you all the latest best practices we have picked up on and learned from the manufacturer exclusions, how to reduce their impact, and how to be able to capture more claims. We hope that you find this next 30 minutes beneficial. My name is Dimitri. I am the CEO of PharmaForce, and with me is my partner and our esteemed Chief Product Officer, Anthony Velasquez, who will be doing the presentation. At the end of 30 minutes, what we do is we stop recording the session and we open up to questions. At any time during the webinar, by all means, if you want to ask a question, just go ahead and ask a question in the Q&A button section below, and we'll read it at the end of the meeting and answer your question. Or you can raise your hand. I will unmute you and you can ask your question. We could be part of a dialogue. Sometimes there's no questions at the end, or very little bit, and sometimes it goes over an hour in discussions and dialogue, depending on the topic. So without further ado, I pass it on to the man, the myth, the legend, the great Mr. Anthony Velasquez.
Thank you for that introduction, Dan. So I just want to share with everyone, if this is your, if you're returning and you have been a part of our previous monthly webinars, thank you for joining. Hopefully we have provided some value and helped you in your journey managing your 340B program. If you're new, as Dan was saying, we do this once a month where we pick a new topic in the world of 340B, which are many, and we hope to share some things that we've learned. A little bit of background on me. I've been in the 340B space for over a decade, worked for covered entities, and now am the Chief of Product here at PharmaForce. With the topic today, I did share at a presentation with 340B Health 2 days ago on this topic, but today's presentation has brand new content that has recently come out related to manufacturer restrictions, and some new information on the 340B ESP portal that I had not shared before in any presentation, and I have not seen anyone else share. So you want to stay until the end because I have some really good nuggets of information for those of you that are submitting to 340B ESP, and then for those of you that are not, I think that it'd be really good to know what that process entails. Goals for this presentation today for the next 30 minutes is to help covered entities. That's our ultimate goal, is to help you to be better educated on this topic. This happens to be a very complex topic. There are many moving parts to manufacturer restrictions, and we want you to know how to navigate it as best as possible. There are some really good resources out there. At the same time, there aren't many great resources out there that are really getting into the weeds on how to really manage this. There's a lot of really high level resources that are saying, hey, here's this manufacturer decided to exclude, or this manufacturer is now excluding for community health centers, which is not something they were doing before. There's a lot of great content on that, but not getting in the weeds of the process. And that's what I'm hoping to accomplish today. And at the end of this, you will leave knowing how to navigate this, and while doing it compliantly and optimizing your 340B program. So here are the things that we're going to visit today. We're going to talk about the news. What is going on in sort of the macro level of manufacturer restrictions? There are now there's another manufacturer that is now proposing restrictions that I want to share with you that just recently has been announced. Where I'm going to talk about CE trends. One of the things that I wonder with our customers that I think about a lot is what are covered entities doing? It seems like this is here to stay, at least temporarily, we hope, unless there's an intervention from the government or the legal system. So I'm always curious of what are CEs doing, how are CEs making these decisions, and I want to touch on that. I want to talk about the process for submission. Again, I think for the last few months, we've been in a fog of war a little bit of understanding, hey, how's this process? There's so many parties involved. You now have the wholesaler involved, ESP, your TPA, your covered entity. I want to talk about the wholesaler pricing changes. some of the challenges we're seeing with that. And then I want to talk about this at-risk status. This is something that's concerning a lot of covered entities. It's really coming out to the forefront. Even 340B Health has recently sent an email announcing they're getting a lot of entities concerned about this. So I want to touch on that as well. So let's start with first, what's in the news? So what's going on with this manufacturer restriction topic in the industry? So I'll start with some bad news. The bad news is that the trend continues. There's another manufacturer called Woodward Pharma Services that is now proposing restrictions via a direct purchase policy. So this is a policy where they are outlining sort of a specific way that you can acquire 340B pricing, and it is not sort of available widely, but you have to go directly to them and through their process in order to access 340B pricing for their drugs. Some of the drugs impacted I have listed here on my slide. This will be effective January 1st, 2023. There's some obviously concerning things other than besides the fact that we think, and I think many in the industry think this is unlawful, but there is an agreement to a metric-based monitoring. This is some of the same thing that we're seeing with 340B ESP, where there is a comparison of 340B accumulations to purchases and a very strict monitoring of that that is causing some challenges and burdens for covered entities. There's also reports that Sanofi specifically denying pricing for hospitals submitting, and they're citing insufficient data. So there's some things going on with the way the data is being submitted in 340BSP, where some of these are basically sharing concerns that they're going to lose pricing or have lost pricing associated with this new sort of insufficient data request or demand that the manufacturer is making. So that's some of the bad news. Now there's some good news. This is nothing that I'm saying should be legal advice, but there are some court cases or court judge, for example, in one of the cases, there's multiple cases between HHS and the drug manufacturers. In one case, a court judge explicitly said that HHS should consider in placing fines on drug makers. That's not a step that they have taken just yet, at least that I'm aware of. But in this case, this was recently announced, I want to say in the last 2 weeks, that a judge recommended fines before proceeding in a lawsuit between HHS and some of the manufacturers. There was HHS continues to fight, and try to appeal a lot of these cases. There was a correction from a DC appeals court judge that initially sort of indicated they were siding with the manufacturer, now has flipped and said, I side with the government on this, and we do not support that this is a lawful action to restrict 340B pricing. So there's a lot of legal activity going on. Ultimately, what we all hope, those of us that are in the field and are providing services to patients, is that this is overturned, that this is similar to the case with Medicare and the reduction of payment for infusion drugs, and that hopefully this is another thing that will be overturned and hopefully allow for companies to go back and recapture some of those savings. Now, what are entities doing? What are we seeing? So based on some of the data that we have collected, we're seeing around 20% submission rate, mostly hospitals, because hospitals are mostly impacted. Health centers and other grantees are impacted in a limited way compared to hospitals, but everyone is sort of impacted by this financially and from a patient perspective and access. But we're seeing about 20% submission rate. If you all have been around this topic, you will know that this started as covered entities stood together, pretty much uniformly. So we're not submitting to ESP. Unfortunately, the impact continued to get bigger and bigger, and we've seen a little bit of a trend towards sort of submitting the data to ESP. I don't have an opinion on what's right or wrong in the matter. I think every entity has to make that decision for themselves. But there is about a 20% submission rate on this matter, where entities are submitting data to the 340B ESP portal and going through the process. Now, if you're a covered entity that's not submitting data, here's some things that you should consider, whether you're weighing the decision or you've made up your mind and your leadership has made up its mind that they're not going to submit. One thing that I would highly recommend is tracking the financial impact from this, tracking the claims, the individual claims that have to be blocked as part of your program, your 340B program related to this. Again, if there's a favorable court ruling in the future, you want to have that data available in case there is a process for you to go back and recapture some of that 340B savings. I don't have an indication. I'm not saying that that's going to be exactly what's going to happen, but there is the hope that that is a sort of favorable ending for covered entities in this matter, and that you're able to recapture some of the financial impact. You want to consider the patient impact or access. Are patients able to access drugs that they previously were able to access through your cash card program and things like that, and how that's impacting your patient care? You want to consider other factors, like have you looked into potentially opening an in-house pharmacy or other ways that will allow you to capture 340B pricing? Ultimately, my biggest recommendation is do the minimum at least. If you're still deciding, what to do. I spoke to a health center the other day and said, no, we're not doing it. We're thinking about it, but we're not doing it right now. At a minimum, you want to designate a pharmacy, take sort of take what you can get at this time. If you're covered and not submitting to ESP, and ultimately educate your committee, your leadership on the matter. To ensure that everyone's on the same page about how to proceed with this. For CEs that are submitting, the same advice: track and report the financial impact. Maybe you are able to capture some, but not all. But track and report the financial impact that this is having on your covered entity. Document the process. I'll have more sort of detailed information in the next slide for covered entities. That I'm going to lay out that are submitting, and also for those that are not submitting. Hopefully this is helpful to you as well. So here are things to consider in this process of submitting the data to ESP. This is of course high level because of the time, but I want to stress the fact that you want to document this procedure, document a policy that states how you are at a TPA level, chain pharmacy level, etc., how you are going to submit this data to the 340B ESP portal, who's responsible for submitting the data to the 340B ESP portal. You want to consider if any chains in your network are not allowing you to submit data to 340B ESP for pricing. I think pretty much there isn't a lot of that going on right now. I want to say in the last 1 to 2 months, Rite Aid was a chain pharmacy that is now allowing covered entities to submit to 340B ESP. If you're not doing that, that's another sort of area that you want to track. From a TPA claims data perspective, again, if you have multiple TPAs, you're working with Well Partner for CVS, Walgreens for Walgreens, you're working with maybe another sort of TPA for your independents and things like that. All of those processes are going to look different, and you want to document that to ensure that you are capturing and maximizing as much as possible. Submission frequency, this is usually happening on or before the 1st and the 16th of the month. You want to make sure, one thing that you want to make sure that even 340B ESP stresses this is that it's a catch-up file. In other words, if you submit it from the 1st to the 15th, on the 16th, that then you're submitting, the following submission will be from the 16th to that sort of the day before you're submitting. So you want to make sure that there's no gaps. That's sort of the most important thing. Even if you submit a little bit late, you want to make sure that you cover any gaps in the date range that you are submitting the data. And then you also want to manage your TPA ordering. This is something that requires proper timing. So from the moment that if you have lost pricing, you now have to submit that claims data to gain the 340B pricing again. Once you get that 340B pricing, then you can order at 340B. I'll talk a little bit more about more specifics on that process. But what I do want to stress is you want to make sure that you're managing how your TPA is releasing orders, because you don't want situations where in that time frame where you're waiting for the pricing to be updated, that your auto replenishments are going out at a non-340B price. All right, now going on to the next topic. This is what I would say is the biggest frustration and difficult part to manage as it relates to manufacturer restrictions. So my number one recommendation or takeaway with this is to monitor the pricing changes in your catalog. Do not sort of set it and forget it. Do not think, oh, just because I got approval, I'm good now going forward. We're seeing even entities that were not impacted by a manufacturer restriction. For example, a grantee that doesn't even fall under the category of receiving restrictions on their pricing is now seeing non-340B pricing on their catalog. And we're seeing that happening more often than usual. So I highly recommend covered entities to try to, I know it's difficult, but try to implement a process in place where you are monitoring pricing changes across your catalogs. And also your TPA processes too of, is there a way that perhaps you can block ordering for a certain period of time? Things like that you want to look into to see if you can help reduce the possibility of this happening. You want to work closely with the wholesalers. You want to work closely with ESP, including the manufacturer. In some cases, you have to go directly to the manufacturer, but you want to work closely. As soon as you see a pricing discrepancy, you want to report that right away, especially if you should not be seeing that on your catalogs. I think, historically, having worked in the 340B for both grantees and hospitals in the past, monitoring invoicing or invoicing charges has not been something that has been at the top of the list of the to-dos for 340B managers and coordinators. But given the sort of the changes and the frequency that we're seeing this happen, I highly recommend that this possibly be part of your monthly audits or checks, just to spot check, pull some of these invoices, see that you were charged a ceiling price, maybe pull up the OPA database and see the ceiling price or the PVP catalog to compare that you're being charged appropriately. All right, so moving on to the at-risk status. So what is this? This is something that we have seen many reports on recently as it relates to submitting data to 340B ESP. So again, this only applies if you are a covered entity that is submitting to 340B ESP. So if you are not submitting to 340B ESP, if you have not created a login in the portal, then this doesn't quite apply to you, but it's good information, I think, to know if you are weighing proceeding with that plan for your covered entity. And essentially what is happening is that covered entities are now seeing their pharmacies sort of flag, and you will see a status called at risk. And then when you hover over the informational sort of description of that status, it says, you have not submitted sufficient claims data to support your purchasing. If you don't submit by such date, sometimes it's very time sensitive. So you want to be looking at this regularly, but if you don't submit by a certain date, you are at risk of losing your 340B pricing on this account or at this pharmacy. So I say that to say that accurately and timely reporting is very important. This process is really all over the place. depending on the TPA. Some TPAs are directly submitting to ESP on behalf of entities. Some TPAs are providing you a templated report. Some TPAs are asking you to pull it from their portal directly, and you have to pull it and format it and those sorts of things. So because the process is all over the place, there is opportunities where the data is not being submitted in an accurate and timely manner. So it's really important for CEs to be aware of that. And basically, this almost works like an accumulation. There is a usage versus purchasing comparison. So to make it very simple, if you captured 5 insulin prescriptions at 340B, and you submitted that data to 340B ESP, that sort of generates a, hey, you can now buy 3 at the 340B pricing catalog. And if you submitted data for 3, but you purchased 10, you have a gap of 7, then that could trigger your pharmacy being targeted as at risk. And that's why it's so important to monitor the portal, to monitor your data, and sort of not set this as a set it and forget it. This is one of the biggest concerns with this process, is that it truly is a burden to covered entities. Managing this process can be very complex depending on your size, and can be very labor intensive. So this was something that covered entities raised from day one of manufacturers sort of requesting this, right? Because we knew it was not going to be this easy. It wasn't going to be you just send the data and everything is good, right? We just want to know. We just want to know sort of the accumulations, right? But now there's a comparison. Now you have to track that there's no gaps in your reporting. For covered entities that have to do a historical reprocessing, for example, your encounter feed sort of went off during a EMR change. You haven't sent encounters for a few weeks. Your TPA catches it or you catch it. You have to go back and do a reprocessing. Those medications that you now submit, if you don't submit sort of all that medication in a timely manner, you could lose the ability to replenish that at 340B pricing, or worse, you could lose the ability to replenish at 340B pricing at this pharmacy altogether. Because if you're buying that at 340B, but you didn't submit all of the data, it could get to that point. What's even worse is there's actually and this is posted on the 340B ESP FAQ if you're interested in reading more about it. But from the day that you submit data to the portal, you can go back 45 days based on the date of service. So if you're submitting data on November the 1st, for example, the system will consider claims eligible that go back 45 days from the date of submission. So November the 1st, you can go back to mid-September, for example. So let's say from 9/15 until November the 1st, any claim that is 340B eligible submitted during that time frame sort of will be accumulated for replenishment, but anything older than that would be ignored. So you want to be careful that you're not just submitting historical claim transaction, but that you're in communication with the 340B ESP to sort of request an exemption or an approval for those claims and explain the process if you had a historical. This can happen with new pharmacy implementations too, where if you're implementing a new pharmacy, maybe it takes your IT team a little bit of a time to send encounter e-prescription data. That can lead to you submitting claims that are older than 45 days. So you want to monitor this. If there's any nugget of information that you take, is how time sensitive this process is. We're also seeing about 4 weeks to update pricing from the time it was requested. So if you requested pricing on November 1st, you went through the process, you submitted to the portal, submitted the claim data. We're seeing that process take up to 4 weeks to actually see the pricing updated in your catalog. So you want to consider sort of all of this for your new pharmacy implementations. If you have a historical process, all of that are all burdens that come along with this task now of submitting data to ESP. The last thing that I want to leave you with is to monitor and audit the process. As I mentioned before, it's not a set it and forget it. You have to monitor those pricing updates. I'm hearing that you're only getting access to 340B pricing for NDC submitted. So if you are submitting for manufacturer X and you submit claims for 3 of the 10 NDCs that are blocked for pricing, you're only going to get 340B pricing for those 3, not the other 7. I'm also hearing the opposite. So unfortunately, I don't have a concrete answer on that. I think I've talked to companies that say, yeah, I'm only seeing 340B pricing for the NDC submitted. Talked to another company that said, no, I actually saw it for all my products. So again, this all goes back to auditing and monitoring. Unfortunately, it takes time. It's time consuming. You need process and resources in place to do that. Monitor your data submission. Make sure there's no gaps in your program, in the data that you're submitting. And ultimately, if you are blocking anything, if you're submitting for one, blocking for another, you want to monitor that so that you don't have things being ordered at a non-340B pricing that will then lead to you having overcharges because you paid at retail pricing for something that should have been 340B eligible. All right, so with that being said, I really appreciate you all joining. We're going to go into that Q&A section of the webinar. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that this content was valuable and you all can go back and implement some of these things in your program.